All right. Hello, everyone. Good morning on this beautiful, but I think still hazy Minnesota morning. So, thank you for joining us. My name is XP. This is my little series of, I guess, podcasts now that I've been doing on Facebook Live. And today we have a really wonderful guest, a friend that I've known for a very long time. Actually, like pretty much since I moved up here back in 2003. Sia Her, who is the executive director of the Council on Asian Pacific Minnesotans. And we wanted to just really capture the moment and talk a little bit about Sunisa Lee's gold medal and what that means for the community, not just the Hmong community, but the Asian community, and really kind of just not in Minnesota, but also kind of overall, because she is the first Asian woman to win all around. And that's just a huge, such a huge milestone, and so proud of the fact that obviously she's Hmong American too. Yeah, I'm really appreciative. Thank you, Sia, for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me, XP. And you're right, we've known each other for quite a while. I was in college when we first met, so.
Yeah.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to such an inspirational topic.
Yeah, no, definitely. I couldn't think of a better person. I've been wondering, oh man, like I definitely, I want to try to get, see it on camera. But when Suni won, I was like, oh, this will be a perfect time. So I'm really thankful again for you to be able to make some time for us to have this conversation. So again, thank you all for joining. Got a couple viewers already. That's awesome. So, Sia, tell everyone a little bit about yourself and your background.
Sure.
And, you talk a little bit about college and McAllister and how you got to that council.
Yeah, well, again, thank you, XP, and welcome to everyone who's tuning into our conversation at this moment. Like you said, my name is Sia Her, and I am the I am the fourth executive director of the Council on Asian Pacific Minnesotans, which is a state agency that was created by the Minnesota legislature in 1985. But while we were created by the legislature, we're housed inside the executive branch, even though we are a non-cabinet agency, meaning that we're not like the Department of Human Rights or the Department of Health and Human Services. The nature of our relationship with the governor isn't the same as the nature of the relationship between those larger state departments and the governor's office. So we were meant to be an independent state agency that when we step before government, we are the voice and the expert on Minnesota's Asian American and Pacific Islander communities. And when we come before the community, we're the expert on state government. Depending on when you look at us, December through June, we're focused on the state's policy-making process over at the legislature. And then, between June and the end of December, we're busy preparing and engaging in communities. And so that's in a very, in a nutshell, what my office is about. I am, I am Hmong American. The road the journey that I've been on to get to where I am today includes a bachelor's degree in political science from McAllister College in St. Paul, Minnesota, and then a master's in public policies from the Humphrey School of Public Policy. And so, for me, I made the decision to go into this line of work as a young college kid. And I always tell this story of one day sitting at breakfast with a colleague of mine who is blonde hair, blue-eyed from Western Europe. And as she and I were having breakfast, she asked me, "Where are you from?" And the typical, the number one question that we all get asked, right? And so I remember saying to her, well, I'm from Laos, but I am Hmong by ancestry. And, I, at that time, I expected her to say, Hmong, does that mean that you're Mongolian? Right. And instead of saying that, she said, oh, I know who the Hmong people are. Right. And I was so taken aback by that. And so she went on to say, I know who the Hmong people are because my, great grandfather and my grandfather were ambassadors to French Indochina.
Wow.
And, and so she's from a small Western European nation. And in that moment, when I was sitting across from her, I had this epiphany, and I thought, I grew up hearing stories about the secret war within the context of the Vietnam War. And, I knew that my parents had a dark history, and that people who identify as the Hmong people, have a story of war and, pain and sorrow, right? And so when I understood that, that the Hmong were an ethnic minority from Laos. And so as I was sitting there, I thought to myself, how is it that Sia, a child from a refugee community that, not so long ago lived in the mountains of Laos, right? How did she get to be here, sitting across from someone whose, parents and grandparents and great grandparents for generations were part of the ruling class of the world, right? And so I decided that, I would go into government instead of taking the traditional path, which at the time was medicine for me. Ever since junior high, I had been preparing to go into medicine. And so it was that particular conversation with that classmate of mine that I decided, I'm going to switch majors. I'm going to declare political science as my major. And I wanted to go into government because I want to be at the table where decisions about resource allocation are being made, not, on the receiving end, once major decisions have been made. And I understood then that, that I'm a daughter of the community, and that my work, that whatever I did in government would be reflective of not just my mind, but my heart and soul, because of the particular history of my people, of the Hmong American community. And so, that's a rather long-winded, but still it's a pretty, in my mind, accurate and powerful, illustration of how I came to a place where I decided that political science was where I was going to go. And at the time, I graduated from Callister in 2004, and at the time, you didn't have, more than half a dozen people who really understood electoral politics and American government and the role of government in the lives of the American people. So. XP, I think you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. Yes. So what year was it that Senator Mimo was elected? Because that was a moment as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I met her right before she ran for office, and I know that I worked on her special election campaign, and that was while I was in college. So I, sometime between like 2002 and 2004, I can't recall the specific year. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that was, this eye-opening moment in Hmong American, Hmong Minnesota history. The community started flexing its political might then. But, thinking back to those moments on the campaign trail, and then, the years following that, even then, I don't, I couldn't foresee that we as a community would be here today, obviously, because I didn't have a crystal ball. We just have come such a long way in such a short period of time. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing, Sia. That's a beautiful memory of the moment of when you made that conscious decision. That's great.
Well,
And
XP, I want to add another point, and I think it's particularly relevant to this conversation we're having that will eventually, be predominantly about Sunisa, and this moment in history for us as a community. And that's that I remember when I was a child, and then when I was a young adult, we would talk about careers. And I had every intention of going into medicine because it was you become a doctor, a lawyer, or a teacher, right? And so I chose the doctor route. And I remember coming home and telling my father that I had decided on a major. And when I said it would be political science, my father said, "Does that mean you're going to work for free?" Right? Like if you're going into government, does that mean you're going to work for free? And I, like Sunisa and her story and this, like the job that the media has done in lifting up, like the role of her mother, her father, but especially her father, and this, the idea that this Hmong American young woman would be, the world's, like best gymnast, right? Like that and like what I remember about my conversation with my father about my career, like is probably one of the most profound aspects of Sunisa's stories, is that it will forever change how Hmong American parents, right, and Asian American parents view, like roads that are less traveled, right, for their children in terms of careers.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think, especially being immigrant refugee community,
Yes.
we haven't been as exposed to like alternative, careers, and kind of like not fringe, but like, careers that haven't been as, emphasized, within the realm of our community and our knowledge. Yeah, right. Doctor, lawyer, teacher, like those are like kind of like the core, but now our community is starting to explore. And with Sunisa, I think, gymnastics, athletics has been something that our community has, done on a really great broad amateur level. But being able to compete at the international level, and then to actually like win and be a world champion, and regarded as one of the best in this moment, that's just super huge. And so there's a lot of comments about, oh, like everyone's gonna like join gymnastics now, and I think that's great. I like let it be, and you see what happens, and it may at some point swing in another way, but let's enjoy this moment. Yeah, I love it.
Absolutely. You've, like, in what you just said, you've packed so much there, right? And I understand that we're our conversation is going to go until 11 o'clock, and so you and I will have to remind each other that we should probably unpack the difference between an immigrant and a refugee, right? Because Sunisa's story is it's like 1,000 times more powerful than it otherwise would be, because of the very definition of a refugee, right? And what that means when you are looking at walking a path that requires resources that are almost always not available to refugee experienced communities, especially to families in a community that is in its 46th year, in America, right? So 1975 was when the Vietnam War ended, and of course, America withdrew from Southeast Asia, and then the first Hmong American family arrived in Minnesota in the winter of 1975. So, recognizing that we arrived on American soil less than 50 years ago, right? And even 46 years into our American experience, We see that, that video of like the beam that her father made for her because they couldn't afford, um, more than that. Like, that is such a powerful image. It it is, I mean, it's in the grounding, right? Like in the context of her family's history and our community's history, that you fully realize the breadth and depth of the power of this moment and this story and this young woman and her family. I just I just get emotional thinking about that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That imagery, of her doing the flips on the wooden beam
Yeah.
at home. Yeah, that's I mean, I don't know where they've used to live, but I mean, it just looks like some backyard in St. Paul or something.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
and you can just identify with that like so much. Like,
Mhm.
oh, like that was that girl next door who kept doing those flips, and now
Yeah.
she's a champion.
So, there, maybe other people wouldn't necessarily notice like the background, right? But I think for most of us who are members of the Hmong American community, we're not just noticing her and the beam and the fact that she's, doing some amazing flips, right? But we're noticing the backdrop, right? And you almost want to say, oh, that's so Hmong, right? And you're like, oh yeah, I could possibly pinpoint where that house is, like for those of us who have spent the majority of our lives or, who were born and raised here, yeah, like it's just, oh, that's St. Paul, like I could totally believe that, right? And so, like the story of St. Paul, the story of Minnesota, right? And how St. Paul, Minnesota, or just, really the state of Minnesota has become the city on the hill, for not only Hmong Americans, but for people of Hmong ancestry throughout the world. That is really has been lifted up so beautifully, by Sunisa and her family. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's a
I'll
great.
get back to you since I'm doing most of the talking.
Yeah, no, it's all good. It's that's a good thing. And thank you so much for kind of clarifying. Yes, there is difference in definition between who an immigrant is and who a refugee is. And you're right. Like you're so right. Like the fact that Hmong are refugees, and that she comes from a refugee background, right? That we had to leave Laos, go into camps in Thailand, and then and they came here from there, and or other, and then had to, go to other countries.
Right.
Yeah, that that is kind of the crux of
Yeah.
our like origin story.
Yeah. So,
Talk a little bit more about the Hmong being the the largest group
yeah.
in Minnesota, and what that means in terms of the work that you've done. I know disaggregated data has been a big topic recently. Also, that we've talked about, and obviously COVID-19 has impacted our community here. It's impacted Sunisa, right? She's lost some family members. So yeah, what does it mean to be the largest group, and what is what are some challenges that we face, and then we can get to like how Sunisa has impacted all this as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've been executive director for 8 years now, and so I just, when someone asks the questions that you just did, it puts me in a position where I just, feel as if I'm overwhelmed by the sheer amount of information I carry in my head about Minnesota's API community. So, the Council on Asian Pacific Minnesotans represent a community that's estimated to be about 350,000. So we reside in every single one of Minnesota's 87 counties. Up in northern Minnesota, we have our Lao community and our Filipina community. Down south, we have Hmong and Karen and Burmese. And so we're this incredibly diverse community that we know, is made up of Americans, who are immigrants and refugees or descendants of immigrants and refugees from Asian and Pacific Islander nations. So, Pataliko Haina, like one of the most important messages that my office is consistently putting out there, because our job is to lift up the Asian American and Pacific Islander experiences in the state of Minnesota. We are often reminding policymakers that itu immigrant, itu nang ni tsi share had ni yo chi te chai tona, right? Di do ha dia yan cho na lu te chai che ni to lu te chmi kanana e te jo ni yo ta ho lu lo la po ni yo more opportunities tao cha yo had ni nyon lu te chona, okay? So itu immigrant na itu na one more basic tsi share had ni yo nyol ni yo mu na, okay? But itu nang itu refugee na ke lu mong je be de ya itu ning thona na, right? So be ta mong na be ya ning thona nên thôi nó mà bị tao hạt tiền cho bé nhớ rồi bé lúc đấy chờ là chị bây giờ bé giờ trâu tua là bỏ trâu gì là bỏ trâu cơ nè, right? So bé thế thì do vì linh đó thì bé thế thì chỉ để chờ so thầu bé có thế cũng chờ do thì như họ cho lâu bia cho nhớ rồi đấy chờ lo cho, right? So tao cá cho Việt Nam đó chị mong cho trong nhỏ chỉ tao rồi đấy chúng tao là chị là thế thì là cho tới cho Thái kỳ tôi một cho tới cho Mika lo là tới cho Bắc kỳ là tới cho Anh kỳ tin đó. So at the Asian Pacific Council, we constantly have to remind our stakeholders about the refugee and the immigrant, right? Because Minnesota's community, Minnesota's API community is uniquely different from any other state's community in that the majority of our community members, right, is refugee experience, and the largest community, Asian Americans, the Pacific Islanders, not Minnesota, we're estimated to be about 90,000 strong. And then, India, they estimate that there's a more chicho the path, mudo chicho chipada, bay or don't chap like the short. Okay, so big and monkey, they are the toga hides and tona, the monk, the come in, the nyala, the blood, the Koran, nang and yokoto, they can pamatona. We make up more than 50% of Minnesota's API community. And so, most of the time, the refugees, they arrive here after decades of being in refugee camps, right? Where they have had few to no opportunities to be in the formal classroom, right? So they've had little to no formal education. They've had little to no access to health care, right? So what we are talking about is a group of new or newer Americans who are limited in English proficiency, who may not know, who are unlikely to understand or have trust in our in Western medicine, right? And we encountered that, especially during this time when we are battling COVID, right? So, when we talk about refugees, we don't talk about them because it's because we just want to lift up the, the tragedies or the less than positive aspects of our refugee communities. It's because we need to understand, what they have and what they don't have, right? So their assets and their strengths and their challenges, so that we can address their challenges while working to strengthen and increase their capacities where their strengths are concerned. So recognize what a refugee experience community is. We don't have to meet the each and mong or chỉ bảo hạt lỡ mua nhiều bộ đi trả lo cho nhiều một trả thì mà bảo hạt at the collective level, our Hmong American community is while many of us are doing well, most of us are not doing that well, right? And so when we look at indicators of well-being, for example, educational attainment, English proficiency, median household income, right? When we look at household ownership percentage, when we look at health, issues or concerns, amongst Americans, we recognize that, most in the community are still struggling to overcome those challenges, more so than, say, if we were looking at families in our Asian Indian community, vi doch the bigger Asian Indian families mà immigrants here, for example, between 2000 and 2010, the South Asian community was the fastest growing community under our umbrella, under the API umbrella. And the reason for that was because they were coming into the state for jobs in the tech field, right? So they work for companies like Polaris, Medtronic, 3M, right? Ecolab, Boston Scientific, right? Cho nó hiện đến năng của là tư cần tới share nhau rồi là lúc tới chờ là bỏ là tôi rồi tới khi nào tôi cần tới cái share chat ấy thì là tôi ở đó lựa nhau rồi the company ở thấy như là tao hình cái tao cần sửa bé cho Asian Indians nè, là median household income is so share, right? Tại như share chat cho mình cái đó có median household income thế nào. So again, that's just my way of describing or calling out the key characteristics of immigrants relative to the key characteristics of refugees. And again, I personally and professionally believe that Suni's achievement, and her story are so powerful because her story is a story of coming from a place filled with barriers, right? And limited resources. And yet she persevered, right? And yet she kept going. And yet she believed in herself, right? And yet she called on the story of her family and the story of her people, right? The sacrifices that they have made throughout the years to inspire her, right? To not hold her back, but to push her forward. And that's just, again, that's what's so amazing about her family and our community.
Yeah, I think I can just see it in your face, just how happy you are, and I definitely reflect that. I feel the same way. I think this is just an absolutely historic moment, for her, but I'm gonna enjoy the moment as well, as much as I can, because
XP, I think I see tears in your eyes.
It absolutely reflects what you just described. And thank you so much for being able to give us a little bit more in-depth knowledge around, what the community looks like, right? And kind of the struggles and how you're seeing it from your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll have to admit, XP, when I saw that she was going to the Olympics and I watched her perform, I said to myself, I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to jinx anybody, right? But in my heart of hearts, I said, please, she, we have a really good opportunity at gold medals, right? And when I watched the, actual competition, and then that moment when she, received her medal, I cried when the national anthem came on, and I had this instantaneous, like within the time span of seconds, I reflected on the journey of my community, and I thought, never. There's that saying that you don't know what you can be, or children don't yearn to become what they don't know exists. until I saw Sunisa standing there with the American flag, in the backdrop and the national anthem, uh, going on, I, I just, it just was so profound that I shed tears of relief that, she's done it, right? Not because I didn't believe in her, but because I thought, can someone from my community, right, really do this? And then she did it, and I just thought, you know what? Our ancestors probably never imagined this, right? Like when you're a child, your parents tell you that got yudodoshia, mukandana, right? And got you zanje, got you lamuta, mute, she sang not what you, right? And when you see her, you just, I don't know, it's just a moment that you can't even find words to describe because it's so emotional. Yeah, I'm sort of searching for words right now, but I am like you. I get very emotional when I talk about her and the story of the community from which she comes.
Yeah, I cried a little bit. I have a couple of tears because, in the last few years, I've been working in this democracy work, area, and we've done some get out the vote and some campaigning stuff, together. But really, it was me getting involved with the 2020 census effort that really just, opened my eyes even more to the system right around us that's been set up to I guess divide up resources, right? And then now learning how that affects redistricting, right? And so now we're into this redistricting process,
Yes.
and how that sets up our political boundaries, our representation, right? Everyone has probably heard about gerrymandering, and it goes both ways, but but how can we bring community voice right into the process? So, I mean, for me, that is like the ultimate privilege and honor to be able to be a part of a society of a country where I have those rights, to be able to participate and to build a better life for myself and for the people I love, and yeah, in that moment, seeing her getting the gold, looking up at the flag, having the anthem, play. It was just a moment of this is it. This is like the quintessential Hmong American moment where like everyone, all of our like parents and grandparents is like hopes and dreams for success, for for prosperity,
and for dignity,
for respect, all, that came true, to a great extent. I mean, there's still a lot more work to do, but it really came together in that moment in such a powerful and real way, and obviously on such an international stage as well. So yeah, I definitely I felt that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the, I mean, and I want to say this for the record that when we talk about the Hmong American community or just Hmong ancestry people around the world, it's important for us to recognize that the Hmong, is a stateless people, right? We have gone from place to place to place, right? Searching for a sense of belonging, right? And wherever we have settled, and even to a great extent today in America, our minority status as a people, right, has meant that we, have been, whether this was actively done by others or not, we have not been welcomed or desired by the mainstream communities, right? That has to be said, because it keeps shedding light, right? All these facts about who the Hmong are, right? Again, sheds light on why Sunisa's story and why her story is so powerful, and why you and I and probably every member of our community across the United States and around the world, why we shed tears, right? When we turn on our laptops and we see the New York Times, like with stories about the Hmong American community, who are the Hmong, right? Like it's just, yeah, I mean, I'm speechless again, but you had asked a question about the work that we do at the council, and I want to touch back on that because I think there's a piece to this that's about gender, right? So, we've done work on disaggregated data, and disaggregated data is simply data that is broken down beyond just the Asian category, right? So we're talking about the Hmong, the Asian Indians, the Chinese, the Filipino, and looking at data at that level, because again, you and I and so many others believe that the one's experiences as an American of refugee, background, that's important in the conversation around resource allocation, right? But we have also, so the council has been a champion of data disaggregation alongside so many amazing community partners. But we have led, the conversation at the public policy level on gender-based violence against Asian women and girls. And, when you look at Sunisa, her story captures so many facets, right? One of which is it's a she we're talking about. It's a Hmong American daughter we're talking about, right? In an age when we are still talking about violence against women and girls, when we're still talking about, the long-term and short-term impacts of patriarchal practices, right, on the American daughter of Hmong ancestry, right? And so when I think about her and where we are in this moment in time, I see so many victories there, one of which has to do with gender equity and equality, and my hope is that the community and, hasn't overlooked that fact that we're talking about a Hmong American woman, right, who has put us on the map, right? And while I'm not trying to say anything negative about the Hmong American, man or son, I do want to recognize that gender is so important because of how far we have come in the movement to lift up the experiences of Asian American and Pacific Islander women, and in this case, girls and women in our Hmong American community, and how they have both benefited and been disadvantaged because of the practices and beliefs around gender roles and responsibilities.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely a critical part of the story here because, I mean, I still remember when I was younger, the struggles of my, Hmong sisters and cousins, trying to just enjoy a regular like teenage like lifestyle, trying to just go out with friends, trying to just do something outside the house, at times, right? And being regulated to that. So that's real, and things have started to kind of change over time, right? We have really great women leaders now in various fields, And so much appreciation to all of the women leaders, yourself included, who has been able to pave the way for the community to expand its idea of gender roles, right? And what opportunities can be taken advantage of by all genders here in this great country, right? So we're getting there, and then this helps to kind of push it even more, especially for younger girls, right? Because she's only 18, with such supportive parents, who allowed her to break out of that, like more traditional and conservative role as a Hmong daughter, to support her at practices, to be able to, get her through, all those trials. I mean, that commitment, from her parents, from her family, I mean, that is still unique, right? Although there's more and more of it coming. So that's such a great point. And I definitely look forward to to seeing more of that happen, whether it's in athletics or other areas. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, you're welcome. I mean, and I absolutely know that there are so many more stories in the community that are very similar, if not exactly like Sunisa's story, right? Of, parents who decided, that contrary to the norms, right? That they will take a different route, and that they will invest differently in their children, right? And so it's just that with Sunisa, we're talking about, the Olympics, right? And we're talking about the best athletes in the world, right? And so, given the level of attention around the world, and that we as a country put into observing the Olympics, because we're talking about a small group of people who represent us on the global level, right? And so, like, her story is phenomenal, and it's getting like the attention that it should, right? But in my work in navigating all of our communities, and in this case, including our largest API community, I know that there are so many stories out there of fathers and mothers who understand that the world has changed, right? And that the success of the Hmong American community, and the success of the state of Minnesota, and the success of the United States of America, are all directly, contingent upon, both daughters and sons, right? And so I just want to point that out. There's a lot happening in our community, and like every community out there, we are a community that's changing, right, by the minutes, by the hours. And sometimes, we think, well, we've changed so much, and yet we haven't changed all that much, right? But the fact is that it's so important to call out these, important changes that have happened, that will continue to play out, because we're more than just about one story, right?
Yeah, and I think a lot of the change has come in our lives, right, in our personal lives. I think some of the deeper change that needs to happen is the systemic change,
Absolutely.
and that's starting to happen, which is really great to see. I think it needs to be supported more. I mean, we could have a whole conversation on the clan structure, and the 18 clans. I mean, not just the council, but just the whole clan structure and itself. But more youth needs to get involved. More more gender equity needs to happen. And and hopefully this is will help to give that a little bit more push in that direction.
Absolutely.
So, well, go ahead.
I mean, I was just going to say that, case in point, right? We are now, you were one of the first, Hmong American men on the scene, when it comes to the issue of gender equity and gender equality. And I know this because you and I have known each other for so long, but one of the starkest changes that I can point out when it comes to the issue is the fact that there are now, so many more Hmong American men, right, who are not only willing, but they are prepared to take a stand on the issue. And, they're vocal, right, more so than ever before. And they're active participants in the movement to bring justice, right? And to ensure that women, have access to the same opportunities that men do. And so we can't walk away from a conversation about gender equity and equality without recognizing not only the less than positive side, but all of these positive changes that are happening. And that's that more so than ever before, we have Hmong American men who are convinced, right, that the fate of the community and the fate of our society is going to be determined by how successful we all are at the individual and then collective level, regardless of our gender and sexual orientation. I'll just point that out.
Right. So this is wonderful. Again, it's all this awareness and attention, makes us feel proud. But yeah, on that flip side, exactly, we need to take a look and reflect on our own community and ask ourselves, how can we evolve? How can we change? How can we progress? So that way we can continue to support all of this great talent and ingenuity and opportunity across the board for everyone. So
absolutely. I was just going to also add that to that point I made earlier about the Olympics and the fact that Sunisa is now so well known throughout the world. Her impact, right, is beyond our community, our state, and our country. Her impact is worldwide. And you and I know that the Hmong ancestry, the Hmong diaspora, right, covers, countries like China and Thailand, right, and Vietnam. And in those countries, we still have, Hmong people who are still marginalized, right? And, Sunisa isn't just, a powerful manifestation of the hopes and dreams of a people that live within the territorial boundaries of the United States. She is that to Hmong around the world, and she is that to refugees around the world. And the lesson there is, this is what can happen when you give people opportunities, right? When you actively work to create the conditions that will allow people to thrive, right? Because we know that rice doesn't grow in the desert, right? Meaning you have to create the conditions that will allow the human spirit to move beyond survival to thriving, right? You have to create and allow for the access of resources, for those whose circumstances, whose, starting circumstances in life, don't include a silver spoon in their mouth, right? And, around the world today, the number of people who are refugees, right, is larger than it's ever been. And you and I are both, you're not a refugee, you were born here, right?
No, I'm a refugee. Yeah, I was born in Nong Khai
right?
camp in Thailand.
For refugee people around the world, right? Sunisa is I mean, her story really, again, right, lifts up this much, much more global story of what happens when refugees um, are allowed, and are when refugees are allowed into, countries that can afford them the safety and the dignity that they're in search of, right? And so I just want to point that out because, I spent the first few years of my life in the refugee camps of Thailand. And I can only imagine, I remember standing inside the refugee camp and seeing the barbed wire fences, that kept us, that reminded us that there was a place for us, and it was inside those barbed wire fences, right? If I, in this moment, were a refugee child, whether it's in Syria or in Thailand, and I see Sunisa's, image splashed across every, newspaper, every TV screen, I would find hope, right? And I would dream, and have every reason to believe that I too, right, might be able to overcome, the current circumstances in my life, right? And I would wish, right, that the world and the countries that can help me might look at her and say, I'm worth saving too, right? Like, I mean, yeah, there's just so many levels of importance to this story of Sunisa and her family and her community, and her state. Because again, coming back to that point of Minnesota being home to the largest urban concentration of Hmong Americans in the world, in the United States, right? California is home to the largest Hmong American community, but Minnesota is home to the largest urban concentration. We are behind California, I believe. We're behind by about 10 to 15,000, which isn't that big of a gap, right? But Minnesota continues to attract Hmong Americans and Hmong from around the world because Minnesota is the city on the hill for this community, right? It is here that we have the largest cohort of policymakers of Hmong ancestry. It was here that we elected the first, state senator of Hmong ancestry, right? It's here where, we have like the Freedom Festival, right? A gathering that up until COVID brought anywhere between 20 to 30 to 40,000 people, together at McMurray Field, right? So, yeah, I'll just leave that there.
So yeah, that your points and what you just said about me being a refugee child, and how hopefully countries that see this story can say that they're worth saving. That was just so beautiful, and poignant, and it is something that we who have been able to prosper need to be able to to give back, and to open the door and keep the door open, and support these these pathways of resources, to success and prosperity for everyone, right? And so I think that was your point, and you put it in such a beautiful way. So thank you so much. That was just that was so poignant. in these last couple of minutes, yeah,
Yeah.
to that notion of the future, right? Future impact.
Mhm.
You know, what do you think? Um, what do you think will can happen with Sunisa's awareness? With this highlighted buzz around the Hmong community, the refugee community, the Asian American experience.
Yeah.
In the near future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So automatically, right now, right, one of the consequences that I hope, is playing out as a result of, Sunisa's success is the growing more nuanced understanding of who Asian Americans are, right? We are not like all Chinese. We're not all Japanese, right? And Sunisa has done a wonderful job of lifting up, the Hmong American story, right? The journey we've been on that got us here, right? And she's lifted up, and brought back into the conversation the history of the Vietnam War and the secret war within that. So hopefully. Americans beyond our Asian American community now have a more nuanced understanding or have been compelled to learn more about who Asian Americans are, right? Beyond the model minority myth, right? So that's one. Two, that I think is both, something that has happened and will continue to play out is the fact that now, you have parents and future parents, both men and women, right, who are saying to themselves, hey, I'm going to encourage my child or my children or my future children to to explore their dreams, right? And I'm going to take a chance, right? And I'm going to, I'm not going to stick to the road that we have always been on, right? And like that Robert Frost poem, I'm going to encourage my child or my children to travel, to take the roads less traveled, right? And that's okay because while it will be lonely for a while there is no 100% promise that success is ours, someday that we could be successful, and that success will be so profound and so earth shattering, right, that it will um, prompt the next chapter of our story as a people, right? That's so different from anything we could have ever thought about, right? Or dreamed about, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, right? So so that comes to mind. I also think too that you know her success, I hope that um, her story, which is our story, right, will also make its way into the hearts and minds, right, of those in our state who have, the power to influence resource allocation, right? That it will positively influence them to invest, right, in our E through 12 system, right, in our, young adult, programs, right, in our community-based organizations, because it does take a village to raise a child. Sunisa has clearly articulated, and so have her parents, that she's not only the result of her own resiliency and sheer, amazingness, right? But she is, the result of a family that, exists within a community, right? That exists within a larger ecosystem. And, regardless of the barriers, and in spite of the barriers, right, other things worked because other people did what they were supposed to do, right? And everything came together to add to an individual, an amazing human being, right? That then resulted in what we've seen in the last couple of days at the international level. where the Olympics, is taking place. So yeah, so those are the immediate thoughts that come to mind given your question.
That's great. Those are great, Sia. Really I've just truly enjoyed this conversation. I mean, honestly, you and I love talking to you and picking your brain, and we could go on for definitely much longer. So we'll have to do that, again at some time. But
Absolutely.
this is it for this morning. Thank you so much. Much appreciation, gratitude to Sia Her, from the Council on Asian Pacific Minnesotans, for spending some time with me this morning. Thank you so much to everyone who viewed. We talked about many different facets of the community, and there was touching moments, there was insightful moments, there was informative moments. I think for me, just to kind of wrap it up, Sia, is that this is just a really beautiful moment. I've seen that term. I love that term. Yeah. The play on the word for us, and I hope it again propels us forward, brings the awareness and the reflection necessary for our community to be able to take that step in the right direction. So again, thank you so much. Thank you, Sia. Have a great day. Have a great weekend. We'll catch up.
Welcome. I would just add that we were already moving, I think, for the most part, in the right direction. XP, yes. Sunisa's, success is helping to speed up the process. Speed up the process. So many of the dimensions of our community, our state, and our country. So thank you for the opportunity to join you this morning. I love talking about our API community, and I love our state, and I love talking about our Hmong American community, because I think that our success epitomizes or is the best example of the power of the idea of America. So with that, thank you for having me this morning, and we'll continue this conversation offline.
Yes.
All right. You're welcome. Thank you, everyone. Bye.